The content discussed in this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be construed as financial or mortgage advice. Always consult with a licensed professional before making any decisions regarding mortgages or financial matters.
Welcome to the Canadian Mortgage Show. Here are mortgage professionals Alex Pang and Alex Shanks to cut through the BS and educate Canadians on all things mortgages and real estate.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another week of the Canadian Mortgage Show. Super excited. We're getting to bring on our second guest star here. I'm going to give a little bit of a intro here. We got Dylan Taylor. He's a real estate lawyer with Dawson Mullin Law. Now, I'm going to tell you this, Dylan, I see that you completed your JD, which I had to go and Google, which is your Juris Doctor. I had to look that up. You did that at Thompson Rivers University as a law student. Now, you were also a recipient of the Dean's Course Prize. I don't know what the course prize means. I know Dean's means really good. So obviously you got some good grades that way. And you did this in your legislation, administration, policy, sat on the admissions committee, and served as an editor for the Faculty Law Journal. Now, the one that I find really cool and I want to chat with you a little bit more about is that you were a finalist in the Hockey Arbitration Competition of Canada, which you now coach. And it's always great to chat with you, Dylan. You bring so much to it. And so welcome to the show.
Welcome, thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
And so tell me a little bit about what is the Hockey Arbitration Competition of Canada? Like, what is that?
Yeah, for sure. So basically it's one of the law school moot competitions, which is a simulated court-like experience. In this particular one, it is to do with the NHL arbitration. So when my partner and I, and it's done in pairs, actually undertook this competition, you're given either the player side or the club side of an actual arbitration for NHL. And so, for example, one of the players our year, which was 2019, was Sam Bennett. So we were given club side Bennett, and we have to argue why he has to earn a certain salary, and you use comparable players and statistics. Whereas on the player side, you would choose higher comparables and then make those determinations. So when you actually go to the competition, which is held in Toronto each year, that my partner and I still coach that competition, it's cool because you're actually going to argue your case in front of lawyers and player agents who are actually involved in those arbitrations. So pretty cool experience for me when I got to do it, and then I still get to go each year, which is cool.
Yeah, that's super cool. And I was telling Alex about it before. Would you, if you weren't doing real estate for law, like would you be an agent? Would you be doing the guy that's getting them the better contract?
Yeah, I would say I'd love to. I think it's difficult being in British Columbia, especially on the island. Yeah. You would have to go off to Toronto or probably New York in order to do something like that. And always been an area of interest of mine, but I love home and I love the island.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. It's funny, Dylan and I, we get to do some fantasy sports together. I know that you and Alex both love the Canucks. I'm a Leafs fan, so sorry about that, but the Leafs are better.
Hey, Austin Matthews is my favorite player, so at least I'll give you that.
Oh, no, you didn't. Yeah, Dylan, I had a question for you on the arbitration. Just as a sports fan, I hear that arbitration can get pretty ugly from the team side and the player side. Of course, the player wants to make more money. The team loves him, but they want the player to make less. So they've got to totally cut this person down and say, here's why you don't deserve it. But I'm sure in the back room, they're like, oh, we love you as a player, but we just have to do this because we want you to get at a lower rate. Is that pretty much the case?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's the fine line that we try and when we're teaching and we're going through these with our students, we tell them like, hey, if you're on the club side, you're not going to pretend he's over there wearing a shirt and tie and this is one of your players. You're not just going to sit there and say nasty things and that he's terrible, but you are going to poke holes in maybe his full game so you can try and get that lower contract, but you're not going to probably sit there and just completely disparage the player. And same thing on the player side, even as well. If you have a player who's more of a middle six or a bottom six player, you're not going to go in there and act like the person's Sidney Crosby or Connor McDavid. There's an element, a finesse to it, so so you know what you're getting into, and you determine what kind of player we can talk all day, but you determine what kind of player they are, and then you go from there to create your narrative.
I've heard where some teams, they wanted to get the player so cheap that they've ruined the relationship with the player. Yes, they might have won the arbitration case. hurt feelings have been had, and once that player's contract was over, they just bolted. Like, have you heard of cases like that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's certain players that just demand a trade right after. So even though they have it, they get traded right away, and that's fairly commonplace. That's why they'll do anything they can to avoid arbitration, because it's not a play. You don't want to just air out your dirty laundry of what you think truly of this player.
Yeah, that's it. Sports are fun one, but let's talk into the maybe to me what hearing you talk about that stuff there, Dylan, I'm gonna be like, man, real estate's gotta be boring for you. And so let's get into some questions.
Paperwork is a little boring, but
exactly.
As you'll find out while we go through this, the transactions are always quite interesting.
Yeah, they're not plain and simple. But the thing that's we always talk about it, that brought me and Alex together, myself and you, Dylan, how we connected with each other. Like, we know that you're pretty active on social media. And we want to figure out, like, what decided you to, like, go and do that? Like, what brought you to start talking about real estate law?
Yeah, I think the reason why I use social media, and it began when I was an articled student. So before you become a lawyer, you work under a lawyer or multiple lawyers to learn the trade. And at that time, when I was beginning to get my name out there so people knew who I was, I recognized pretty quickly that there's a lot of lawyers that are not willing to go and put themselves out on social media and provide that value to the potential clients and get your name out there. And it felt like a bit of a unique thing for me to do. And my role and goal as a lawyer was always to try and break down those walls. So people felt that they could communicate with me and contact me directly, which is why I use social media. And you can DM me on Instagram, and you can text me my personal cell. And I have one phone, and it's all I use. And I just like to be available. So it was a way for get my face out there.
So Dylan, what content are you finding that most popular? Like what do you find that people are most engaged with? The stuff that, like, what kind of things?
Yeah, honestly, it'd be the stuff that may be considered boring to somebody who's in the trade and does it every day. It's the stuff that you just don't know. I work with a lot of first-time home buyers who haven't been through the process before. So a lot of them have never seen a lawyer, never been to a lawyer's office, don't know at all what the process is like and how that operates. So even just as simple as what's it going to be at the lawyer's office, what to expect, what is a statement of adjustments, how do you get a bank draft to me, how do you make it, when do we sign, just those types of things that I find valuable, that my clients find valuable as well.
We're in it every day. And I know I even think sometimes, like, this should be such a basic thing, but yeah, like, other people don't do it every day. And that same thing, like someone that I went to a mechanic shop, to me, something that is really complicated, to them, it's super easy. And that's where I like social media, is because we can break it down. You actually get to break down something for someone and give it to them as easy as possible. And for one, we know that the banks aren't doing that. And I'll tell you this right now, I don't know any other lawyers that talk about how the industry works as well. I don't know if it's like a boys club thing of, like, they just don't want to share. You only get that information if you come to me. But it's like, rather just share to the world and the people will come to you.
Yeah, I think that's the case. There's a lot of people who just aren't that entrepreneurial in their endeavors, and every lawyer is a little bit different, and none of us are created the same, and we have our own skills. And I think mine has always been relationship driven and more of the business of law rather than the actual work under a lawyer, get what's given to you and just eat that way.
And that's like the one thing I know about you, Dylan. Like, other lawyers, they work in other industries as well. Like, they might do common relationships and stuff, where, like, you solely only focus on real estate. And what made you come up with that decision?
Yeah, I always knew, I didn't know for sure that I'd go into real estate when I first became a lawyer, but I always knew there was going to be a certain area of the law that I became most comfortable with. I want to say expert. I want to say specialty. We're not allowed to say that, but if I was to allowed to say I specialize in anything and what is my bread and butter, it's real estate. And the reason why I did so is because it's an area of law that has a lot of moving parts, so it remains interesting. We have tax issues, we have estate issues, we have all sorts of different issues that are always coming up. So you can continue to develop that knowledge and not completely feel stagnant in it, but also you can scale your business, you can grow it. Yeah, so there's a lot of things about real estate I really liked, and it was all the different professionals that you get to meet and build your network. It's just really cool.
Dylan, so this probably is, you hear this all the time, but we just want to educate the viewers out there. What is the difference between going to a notary or using you as a lawyer? Other than the common perception is, oh, why don't you just save some money, use a notary versus going with a lawyer? What do you have to say about that one?
Yeah, I do get that question a lot. And I just think a better way to maybe even frame that question would be the lawyer you're thinking of using versus the notary you're thinking of using, right? And there's a lot of good notaries that can get deals done that are smooth and easy, but where situations come up that it's going to be difficult, there's going to be advice that perhaps needs to be given. That's when you want to make sure that you use someone who knows what they're doing. There's a lot of bad lawyers out there. There's a lot of good lawyers out there. There's lawyers who do real estate, but it's not their main focus. So they're off in court on the day of closing and they can't sign the trust check. That's going to be an issue for us because we need that money when we have to close our deal. So now the biggest misconception with notaries is that people generally think that they're just a cheaper option because they're a notary. And that is 100% not the case. It's such a competitive market and there's a lot of lawyers and there's a lot of notaries out there. So the price is going to be very similar amongst all of us.
Yeah, and that's where I see it. We see it, and it depends on the market. Like you could go in downtown Vancouver, and it is a lot more expensive than downtown Victoria. And that's people put prices on where the more wealthy live. But I see the difference of like a notary to a lawyer, and you're talking either no difference or you're talking about $100. But notaries have definitely sold the fairy tale of like, hey, we are cheaper. We are cheaper.
Well, they love that. And why wouldn't they? Because people are going to think, yeah, we can just go and save some money. But yeah, just generally speaking, the pricing can always be a bit of an interesting obstacle too, because there's people who quote and they just quote legal fees. It's $900, they say, but they're not considering the disbursements, which registration costs, the courier costs, software costs, office costs. None of that is often brought up, which can be concerning as well. So you just stuff your viewership wants to be aware of.
Yeah. And the one thing I'll give a shout out for you, Dylan, is the one thing that you do for clients is you'll review the title for them, like, which is a really important thing. You don't do that as a charge. Notaries, lawyers, other people will put a charge on that. And the average I've seen is $500. And really, like, they're just looking at the document and they're saying, hey, yeah, good to go. There's no easements that are going to affect you. And to me, it's a bit of an added cost.
Yeah, that was a gouge. I can look at a title and I'm not versed in it, but I'm like, oh, there's something that looks funky. That's going to cost $500 to look at.
Yeah, it's a good one. And that's where, again, yeah, you want to be with people that are going to trust and give you that information. Like, I can see what Dylan does. It's like, it's just part of his process. Like, hey, I'm going to review it, even if you don't ask me to do it. It's not something that I'm doing to get an extra fee from you. And that's where I'd say some places are there to nickel and dime you.
Yeah. There's certain times when you pull a title and there's nothing on it. So what did you really review if it says none across the board? Now, there are certain ones that have a million things on there. You want to pull those things. You want to go through them. You want to provide that to the client and talk about it because it could be important to him or her.
Yeah.
And again, there's probably one major difference too, is that being a lawyer, you can give legal advice versus a notary cannot. Is that correct?
Yeah. There's certain things that we can definitely give advice on, especially if it starts to get hairy or difficult. Like oftentimes we have to negotiate holdbacks. Maybe there's a cold snap and a pipe burst, something like that. As lawyers, we're going to be more willing to get in there and get the client looked after, whereas I don't even know if a notary is able to do so.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Let's bring this as up a good one. And what's the craziest thing you've seen from being a lawyer in real estate from like your sales and purchases? Obviously, we don't want to talk about names, nothing that way, but like what is like the craziest deal you've ever seen go sideways?
Yeah. It's hard to really pinpoint maybe one that
is it happening on a daily or a weekly basis?
Well, there's just certain things. I think the most difficult part of our role is that we can't control everything. And myself, I speak for myself. I'm a bit of a control freak. I like being in charge of certain things, and I like knowing where. I wish I could fund my own mortgage and I could do everything and get the own insurance and just have everything in place, because then you're not relying on any third parties. But there's certain things that happen. And if you don't know what you're doing, then it's going to be an issue. And that's whether that's getting certain conditions satisfied or knowing that certain lenders like documents in advance prior to others or how things operate. Yeah, I think just being generally organizing and understand how the transaction works. And that's through experience and having the right staff, technology, all those things in place so you can make sure that things run smoothly.
Yeah, you touched on that. My next question is, what advice would you give to your buyers and sellers to make sure your job is easier in the process?
Yeah, and I think communication is likely the most important thing, and having those conversations early. So there's often times when a buyer gets into an accepted offer but doesn't choose a representative until a couple days or a week before it closes. I don't care if the deal's closing in January. You want to make contact with me right away. Get that file over to me with the contract, the instructions, if you can get it instructed, just so they're all in the right place so everything rolls smoothly. We can have the conversations about when they expect to sign, or even book a signature slot in advance. Go ahead.
I was going to say, the funny thing for Alex and myself here, we see the mortgage, we see the commitment letter, we see what we need to get done. What on your side is completely different. And that's where for us, it's sometimes like, hey, I know other banks and brokers that once it's out of their hands, they just say bye-bye. They're not going to figure out what could go wrong. And it's then you having to go and figure out, well, did this person pay out this debt? Why is this number here noted? And that's that clear line of communication.
Yeah. Communication's everything in this business. Being able to pick up the phone and call each of you and you answer the phone and having that conversation, or the clients in my office and there's something, perhaps the rate isn't their updated rate that they thought they were getting. You need to be able to contact you and talk to you and make sure that you're available. And the same goes with us. When communication break down is when you have issues with files. Perhaps they go on vacation without telling you. There's buyers that are going to be away. We see it all. It's like everyone wants to go on vacation as soon as they get into an accepted offer. It's maybe they're going to celebrate, which is great. Go do it, but have a conversation with me. Let me know that's happening.
One thing that you mentioned about not booking an appointment with you or not engaging with you until like a week prior to closing, that they've done that because they've shopped around for the best deal and they waited too long, and then they finally come to you, and then realizing that the price, like the cost is almost the same across the board. It's just a matter of who you want to work with.
And then you're going to get charged now because it's a rush fee though too.
I think certain places would charge a rush fee. Yeah, we try to avoid those. We try and avoid the strata rushes and all that stuff. But there's other people who charge a rush too. If you or have to order strata and you're acting for a buyer and they're buying a strata property, you order certain strata forms. If I don't get enough time to get those ordered, there's going to be rush fees, and those can be quite expensive. Yeah. So get to me early. We can have the conversations and we can make sure that everything runs smoothly.
Yeah, I like it. For me, it's just helping the clients, because first-time home buyers, it's a stressful situation. Talking about like where that down payment's going to come from. What do you need to bring in for that and everything? That's a big one, because they might not realize, hey, I need to bring a check. Do you just access my bank account, Alex, and give it? Like, I think people almost think mortgage brokers and even banks, like they have more control than what we really do. Like they think that we can do every single thing for them. I had someone that just recently said, hey, Alex, I want my down payment to come from this account. I'm like, hey, that's great. I can help tell you where the down payment needs to come from, but I can't remove the money for you. Like you do have to do that.
Yeah, you're exactly right. People will bring in a pre-authorized debit form and be like, okay, you can pull the funds out of my account. It's like, no, I can't. You're going to have to bring those to me. And which is why if your money is not liquid, it could be a problem as well.
Yeah, this is the fun one. It's if you have down payments that are coming from a virtual bank, what do you suggest that way?
Yes, you just want your money to be liquid. So you need to be able to move that money around. If you have an internet bank, your Simply Financial or Tangerine or anything of like those, or your money's in Quest Trade, which is a great platform. I use it myself. I love it. But if you want to get money out right away, you need 3 to 5 business days. So you want to have all of that in one spot, because you can start having all sorts of issues, especially with holds too. If you're bringing money in and there's potential holds on your bank and all that stuff. So you're buying a house, you need to have your funds ready to go.
And what's oh, go ahead. You go ahead there, Alex.
Yeah, so there was another follow-up on that one. Speaking of virtual banks, I want to take this one step further. I'm sure you get clients who get gifted funds from mom and dad from overseas, from India, from China, or wherever. What extra layers of complication does that involve there?
Yeah, so Well, it's going to depend on the lender and what they want to happen with those funds, if they're going to be using it for the down payment. Our role as a lawyer too is ensure that it's not the proceeds of crime and ensure the source of the funds, but we're not going to roadblock if funds are coming from outside of the country or anything like that. That's more so for the lender and down payment purposes and stuff like that, so they're approved on their mortgage, and you would know more about that than me, but mine is to ensure that I know where the money's coming from, who it came from, and that it's not the proceeds of crime in violation of our law, society, and ethical duty.
Yeah, that's where we get the fun thing to sift through like hundreds of different down payment statements, especially when people are chasing those high interest savings account from EQ, Tangerine, and the money is just flowing. And I love to show it to them and say, hey, you saved $25 in interest, but how much time did that take for you to send me all those statements?
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah,
try
I've
to
had
make it as easy as
clients.
possible.
I've had clients. Yeah, you're right. Move funds all over the place just to take advantage of promotional interest rates. And I honestly had to create a spreadsheet to follow the money. Just, okay, 30 grand right here, 30 grand there, and then all that just because just so I can understand it. And then I had to explain it to the bank. Like, this is what I've tracked. Follow where I've gone because that's where the money is. So
yeah. And that's the thing, is just it's making that clear picture and everything. But obviously the one that I find people have confusions from is the deposit, Dylan. And so let's say I'm a buyer and I've put a $20,000 deposit. Like, explain to me like how that like cash like cycles and everything.
Yeah, in terms of how they're going to get credit in the documents, is that
Exactly.
what you mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, because a lot of people get confused between deposit and down payment.
Yeah, for sure. So your deposit is going to form part of your down payment. It's money that you've already put down, and your broker or bank representative is going to deal with that. The way that it operates for us, so let's say we're walking through a statement of adjustments. It's going to show top line what the purchase price was, how much you paid for it, and then it's going to indicate how much of a deposit you put on it, and that's going to be a credit in the credit column. So the purchase price will be a debit, the deposit will be a credit, and it will be shown as a credit on the statement of adjustments, along with, generally speaking, the only other one, unless there's some other property taxes and stuff like that, the big one would be your mortgage. So those would be the two credits. You got your mortgage, and then you have your deposit that you paid, and then you're going to have your debits, which is the purchase price, the transfer tax, which we could talk all day about, but clients need to be aware that there's transfer tax unless there's an exemption. And anyway, so there's that. And then any of the adjustments, which as we go down, which would be property taxes, any strata, insurance binders, title insurance, those types of things.
Do you find people coming into your office not prepared, thinking like, hey, I was going to make a $60,000 down payment, and that's all they're expecting that they have to pay, to only find out it's higher than that?
Yeah, oh yeah. It's happened in the past. Or if you're getting a new build and the person you're working with hasn't worked in the GST, and now there's GST on top, and you're like, I wasn't expecting to pay GST. So yeah, I've seen a lot of interesting things in my office, and the best thing, just have the client prepared. And I know for a fact you do a nice spreadsheet where the client knows where the costs are going to be at, and that's helpful, and it's helpful for everyone involved.
Yeah, it's the hard thing I would say with it is then people, they expect it and they want, like, I'll get calls sometimes like, Alex, you were off by $500. I'm like, man, I'm like $500 on the money. Like, that's not off. Yeah. I don't know what the full legal fees are going to be. I don't know what the property tax is like. You should be saying like, Alex, you're winning, but everyone, like, if you give people too much, then they're like, expect it all the time. It's a hard line I play.
Yeah, totally. Everyone's going to react differently. And most people be like, wow, you were within $500. That's absolutely impressive. And I actually knew what I was doing, and I didn't even have to ask my lawyer, and I knew what I had to bring in. I think I think that's unique in this industry.
Yeah. Dylan, can you explain to the viewers here who don't know the difference between joint tenancy and tenants in common when it comes to like 99.1% situations and all that stuff, and how you see that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think 99.1s, let's talk about that a little bit more. So we'll put a pin in that for now. But yeah, so joint tenancy carries with it the right of survivorship. So if me and my spouse were going to buy a piece of property together, we would likely do it as joint tenants. That carries with it. So if I die, my interest in that property is going to go directly to my spouse without the need for any probate or wills or anything like that. No estate planning whatsoever. Now, if me and both of you are going to buy an investment property together, and we want to hold our 1/3 interest as on our own without the right of survivorship, then we would hold the property 1/3 as tenants in common. So the overall structure would be tenants in common. We'd all have our third interest. And if I die, my property will have to go pursuant to my will.
And that one, like the issue I've seen with it, I've heard some of the nasty ones where, let's say the three of us bought together and say something happened to Alex, and obviously it goes to the next person. They don't want that house and they want to sell it. Like they can sell their portion of it, correct, Dylan? That way, like we don't have to agree on what they want.
Yeah, on its face, you can definitely sell your 1/3 interest, but probably difficult finding a buyer. If you can find a buyer and subject to all those other interesting issues, you can definitely sell it. Yeah, which is why maybe another topic for discussion at a later date would be a co-ownership agreement, which is going to set out the expectations of the parties. Yeah. That will be my advice every time you're in my office. Like, have you thought about a co-ownership agreement? Have you thought about how this is going to operate in the event you're not buying it just with your spouse, or even if you are?
And that's where you, like, the big one I see, like, is when couples are buying together. Maybe they've only been together for 3 or 4 years. Maybe one of them own a house, they're selling and they're buying together. I really talk like, say, hey, you need to talk with your legal representative about a cohabitation agreement to make sure it's like, hey, you're bringing 300K of equity. The other person's bringing 0. We all don't want something bad to happen, but you want to talk about this up front.
Yeah, totally. I think that's when that conversation needs to be had, because it's going to be a lot less awkward when you're in my office or then later on. It's hard to bring up after the fact, or people just aren't going to do it. They're just not going to turn their mind to it. So whether it's a prenuptial or a cohabitation or a co-ownership agreement, get something. Co-ownership agreement would be more specifically to the property. So you're setting out, hey, I brought in this money. In the event we sell, I get this money back. But that's going to be subject to making sure that I paid my half of the stuff I was supposed to pay for. Yeah, exactly. So you can get really complex and complicated, and you can get these long agreements. You can do something simple like, hey, if we sell, I get my portion back, subject to obviously any family rights and stuff like that.
I've been dealing with a few people that are going through just ugly family things, like parents have passed away, then the siblings, like I wish people were more set up, and I wish like parents that have siblings and stuff, like talk about that stuff beforehand, because like it puts such a wedge and divide if something happens to your parents and now you're fighting over money. It's a sad thing.
Yeah, it is for sure.
Yeah. So Dylan, do you want to touch into that 99.1%? Because we do see it a lot in our industry, and you probably see it on your end too.
Yeah. And I have the benefit of one of my best friends is actually a tax lawyer. So I get to jump a lot of ideas off of him and bounce those ideas off, and I get to learn about how some of that operates. Now, for information purposes, generally speaking, 99.1 schemes are going to be subject to audit by the Ministry of Finance. So now we're specifically talking about transfer tax regimes. We're not talking about any other tax regime, where, let's say, the one I want to specifically talk about is when the person is a non-Canadian. So they're a foreign buyer, and perhaps they have a work visa or whatever, but they aren't otherwise exempt under the additional transfer tax. Now, additional transfer tax isn't everywhere. It's in Victoria, it's in Vancouver, it's in Nanaimo, it's in the bigger places. It's not in Calgary River, for example, but I digress. So in the event that you're going to set up you try and set up a 99.1 regime in order to plan around the paying the 20% tax over and above, you're gonna be subject to an automatic audit. And what I've been told is what the government is going to say is that the person who's holding the 99% is actually your trustee, and they're holding your entire benefit. So not only are you going to pay the half on the 20%, you're going to pay the whole thing.
And that's where, that one, I get people scheming about that, wanting to buy, and like, I'm just going to go 1%. And I'm like, you would have to prove that you were living in it 99% of the time and the other person's only there 1. Like, you can't do this as like a scheme to save this money.
You pretty much would have to be going on for pretty much to get the mortgage. Basically, you're going on as a co-signer that's on title. You can't have a beneficial interest 50%. Like if my spouse was a non-Canadian and we bought property together and we did it 99.1, that's just not the case.
Yeah. And that's where, we do it all the time for co-signers with parents doing it. And it's for that reason, which is, hey, if that went to the Tax Act, like super easy. This is only for the benefit of qualifying, nothing to do with profits.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I don't know this for fact, but I do think that we're going to see more of these 99.1s, specifically for the first-time homebuyer exemption, a lot more audited, most likely than we did in the past, because more people get to take advantage of that $8,000 exemption rather than only one a month under the 500 that it was before.
Yeah. No, I agree that way. And that's where it's, sitting down and talking to someone about what that looks like and everything. And I always get the question of like, well, maybe I should buy the house by myself. We'll live in it. And then we should go do it and someone else buy it later. I'm like, guys, like you're trying to save pennies on the dollar. Like you're scheming to probably cost yourself more money.
Yeah. And that may be the case. So you just, those are the conversations you want to have at the onset before a firm accepted offer.
Exactly. Yeah. To know, like, for one, I've heard people get confused. Like in BC, we have that land transfer tax. Everyone gets confused thinking that I just never owned a home before, thinking it's just BC. It's like, no, you've ever owned a home anywhere in the world as your principal residence. And that's where people have been hung up and don't even have the rest of their closing because they're like, oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it's a BC exemption. So it's not an Alberta exemption. It's not an Ontario exemption. If you haven't been in British Columbia for the last 12 months or 2 of the last 6 tax years, you don't get to take advantage of it, even if you are a first-time home buyer. So it's helpful to know how these exemptions operate, because just because you're a first-time home buyer it doesn't mean you automatically get the exemption.
And that's the government, I would say, has done a really bad job of like the way that they talk about first-time home buyers. They make it seem like they get all these different benefits and you only get it as a first-time home buyer. But like a lot of them, they come back into play after 4 years. And so really it's a home buyer benefit for a lot of them. Even like the biggest myth that Alex and I see is like, how much money do I have to put down when I buy my second property? Everyone thinks it's 20%, but really as long as it's your principal residence, you can keep doing that minimum down payment.
Okay. Yeah.
So, Dylan, you see a lot of lenders come in through banks or credit unions, or even they call it monoline lenders or mortgage finance companies. Do you see differences in instructions from, like different documentations and like what they require? Like, who do you find, like, which type of lenders do you find more complicated and which ones are easier?
Yeah, absolutely. I got to be careful because all lenders are my clients, so we got to be careful. But yeah, there are certain ones that are far more paperwork, and that's the big name banks are going to be a lot less difficult than one that requires 30 different stat decks and all these different things signed and confirmations this and all that. So we have certain lenders where it's a stack that's this high of documents, and it depends who the client is. Sometimes it's a corporate client, so you have a corporate, and then you have all the personal guarantees, and then you have a lawyer who's acting for the lender, and they won't have all these things that need to be signed. And then there's my paperwork that also needs to be signed. So it's going to really depend on who the lender is. And you're going to find that the more, although I don't know them, the more B lender type ones are going to be a lot more cumbersome.
Yeah, that's the one thing. I actually had someone recently, it's again, preparing people. We have to do in real estate a lot of repetitive things. People will sign all these documents with us for the mortgage, but they almost have to sign the exact same documents again with you at the lawyer's office. And people are like, well, why am I signing again? I really try to explain to them, like, this is giving you the approval that the bank is going to finance you. The actual legal and binding, that's what what you sign here today, it's not legal and binding. It's giving the bank the right to finance you, but also means that they can pull the financing if you don't meet their contract.
Yeah, you're right. And oftentimes, although you can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know, is the cost of borrow, like mine usually has the cost of borrowing, which is a bit different too, and yours might have it, but mine always has, what is this mortgage going to cost me over the term? They have you sign an initial next to it. You need to know what you're getting into. And a lot of my documents that we sign are Oftentimes it is the approval, but it's also the disclosure and and those types of things, so the client know. And depending, like, let's say if it's the broker channel of the Toronto Dominion, for example, then there's going to be a pad form that needs to be signed, and there's going to need to be a frequency form. So there's just more documents that we have to go through.
I was going to say that. Is it different? Like, there's certain banks out there that work for people that know, like, they work with us mortgage brokers, but they do their own mortgages. And that's where, do you see a difference? Like, be honest, is it more paperwork with a broker than directly at the bank?
It depends. It depends, honestly. There's no difference between Scotia at the bank and Scotia broker. Yep. It's literally the same paperwork. There's a large difference between TD. Our TD, we sign because they sign it all at the bank. So we're just signing the mortgage and the one that gets registered on title, as well as all the acknowledgements and that we can take the funds in, those types of things, and maybe a stat deck or two. Whereas when it's TD, sometimes we're signing the approval or the commitment, and sometimes we're also signing the cost of borrowing and all that as well.
Yeah. That's where it's even for mortgage for people, because we have people all across Canada, like the disclosure that brokers in BC have to do, it's probably the most intense for a compliance package. Like, we have to show the borrowers where we're getting paid a commission, how all the costs break down. If you go to Alberta, the paperwork that they have to sign is it's like two pieces of paper, and in BC it's like 30. And that's just, every place has a different provincial requirement.
Yeah, which is interesting because the Alberta legal paperwork all has to be signed in triplicate, and
it has to be
still
wet
one
ink
that
too.
gets physically taken to the land title office. So where we electronically sign with a very strong password protected platform that gets registered that way, rather than having to send an agent to the land title office.
It's just so funny how it's so different across Canada that way. Like, you would think like we would try and standardize it in a better way.
Yeah, which is why there's no Canadian lawyer. We're all BC or province based.
Yeah, totally. Now, this is a big one. If you could say for anyone should you not have a purchase or sale closing on a Friday? What goes wrong when that happens?
Yeah. I'm not saying don't ever have it on a Friday, because sometimes you need to, but the difficulty with a Friday close, and it's always Friday of the long weekend, because I think everyone they're like, yeah, let's do it. We get 3 days to move in. The difficulty is it gives no wiggle room, and if anything happens, so you need to be perfect. And there's sometimes when you're doing a sale and purchase the same day on a Friday. So you're relying on the sale proceeds in order to use those for your purchase. Now, I'm not in control. We can go back to the start when I talked about being in control of things. I'm not in control of sale proceeds at all. I don't get to choose who the representative was on that for that buyer, just like they got to choose. So when is that money going to come in? Is that lawyer going to be in court all day till 4? He's going to go down to his office, sign at 4:30, and we're going to get him at 5 before the bank closes. Well, now it's going to be impossible for me to, once I've received that money, do all my trust accounting, write checks, and get it off to the bank to close on the purchase, along with register all the documents, because we can't register unless we have the client proceeds in our trust account, which, depending on the lender that you use, certain lenders require that the documents are registered before they'll even fund the mortgage. So now you're putting yourself in a pretty tight position.
Yeah, and I always tell people, like, if we can do everything, and anytime I get a contract from the client or realtor, I'm like, hey, could we maybe move it? Let's maybe not put it on the Friday. Can we change it any other day, just to give that wiggle room? One thing I have been hearing more is like deposits. Let's say you had to do that sale and buy on the same side. For the sale proceeds, can the bank have a hold, because there's been some fraud that way, Dylan, like that they're not letting it happen instantly? Is that like something you've seen more of?
Yeah, generally no, not for us. We don't have any holds on our accounts, and the banks are very aware of that. These funds are coming from lawyers under, I'm not going to talk about the legal undertakings, but they're under trust conditions and undertakings, and they're promising to me that they have the money. So there's no concern, generally speaking, from a bank's perspective.
And so that's funny. That's the stories I've heard this morning. We're not here to bash anyone, but I've heard from notaries that doing the same day closing, they say, oh, well, the money might not go in properly because there could be a hold on it. And so, like, I'd be interested to know, like, if their trust counts are different than lawyers, and if like their requirements are.
Yeah, and I just wouldn't know, but I would assume so. I would assume so, that there's going to be higher There's going to be higher burdens on a notary rather than a lawyer. It's just the way that it's going to operate. We're self-governed, and notaries are treated differently than lawyers when it comes to trust account purposes. I'm not a notary. Like, I am a notary, but I'm not part of the Notary Public Association. I once had a mentor of mine tell me that all lawyers are notaries. No notaries are lawyers.
I think that's the truest one you could say.
Yeah.
So do you suggest then that from a lining up the closing dates, that the sale of a property, let's say the money from the sale of a property needs to go over to the purchase. Do you suggest that, let's say it closes on the sale a day before the purchase closes to be easier? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, exactly. If I was creating a contract that had a sale and a purchase component, I would have it so the sale closed on the day before. So maybe you have it closed on the Wednesday or the Thursday, and then you can actually do the possession of that sale the next day.
Exactly.
So you can have close the one day, you get the money. Next day would be possession for those new buyers. And then you can do a same day close and possession on the purchase for that client. So they're not actually going to be out anytime.
I feel like I don't know why that doesn't get used more, because like I barely ever see the same day closings, and I'm like, well, like why do we not? Let's do it day before, and then we'll set it up. But realtors like to do things differently.
I think they may just not know. Like, and I've heard the expression, the lawyers will handle it, which is fine. We'll do whatever we can, but I'm not in control of everything. So we just have to have so much lined up. And if you're going to do that, and you're going to do it at a very busy month end or mid-month, with our certain firms that do hundreds of transactions a month, it's going to be a bit more dicey.
Awesome. So
I think we got one more question. We're running late, but let's do one more here. I'll let you go, Alex.
So what issues are you seeing more of today? We're hearing more about developers not being able to close, pre-sales not appraising, so people are failing to complete and all that stuff. Are you seeing more of that on your end?
I'm seeing lots of it. Of it on my end. We just had a really big project close called the Bear Mountain 1 project. It was a condominium that had tons of different units, and it was 3-4 years ago when these clients got into these deals, and now either they're not going to be approved, or they don't have the money, or people didn't organize their life as they thought they may have, right? Even though that there was a purchase coming, which has caused all sorts of issues. And whether that's not closing, the loss of deposit, because it's not just a loss of deposit. If you get into one of these contracts and you don't close on it, you don't just lose your deposit, you lose all of the shortfall that developer had. So if they sold it to you for $400,000 and now they can only sell it for $3 million, you're losing your deposit and you're losing the extra $100,000 plus any potential carrying costs. Now there's a duty to mitigate, which means the classic examples, you can't just bleed out. You need to try and do something, wave an ambulance down or something to try and stop the bleeding. But at the same time, you are responsible for every damage that flows from that.
Are you seeing
which
that,
is why you want to know exactly what you're getting into.
Are you seeing that, like, because we know that the builder will win in court every single time? Are all builders choosing to litigate, or maybe they're not choosing to, depending on the size of the developer?
Yeah, it's going to be a case by case situation. I think a lot of developers would, I don't know. It's going to depend. Maybe there's some comfort in, if you're a developer and you take the deposit, you don't have to do any of the other stuff. And you might lose out in the long run, but you're also not going to be in a 5-year court battle. I have one of my best friends who's a litigator and does a lot of this stuff, tells me, like, in 5 years, do you see yourself in court? And most people are probably going to say no, they don't want to be in court for that long. So if you can get it, you can relist it right away. You might find comfort in that.
That's what I mean. Depends on the development. Some might be like, hey, you can't close on it. Awesome. I'm going to sell it for $200,000 more, and I just kept your deposit. Some people are excited. And then other ones are like, oh shit, this thing doesn't appraise anymore. You can't get financing.
Yeah, exactly. And there's all sorts of tough rules on assignment of it too. An assignment is basically somebody else stepping into your shoes as the buyer. And there's all sorts of rules around that. And on its face, it's going to not be allowed, and you have to meet certain obligations. So, and even then, if you assign to someone and they don't close, then you're still responsible too. So pre-builds are interesting.
Yeah. We're hearing a bunch of it in BC, but a lot more in Toronto, because way more skyscrapers in the sky. There's going to be a bloodbath on that.
Yeah, and those are in Toronto. They're expensive everywhere, but they're very expensive there.
Exactly. And there's no one wants to buy them. And we were talking about it before on a recent, the conservatives for like the federal talking about removing the GST from $1 million purchase prices. I think that will actually, for one, help spur some new development, for one, because people can actually buy them and not be like, oh shit, I have to pay an extra $50,000 on top of this as well.
Yeah, well, exactly. And depending on how much the purchase price is, you have to pay both GST and PTT, right? Now, there's an exemption for newly built home if it's under 1.1, but if it's over, you're paying both. There's no scale. You're paying both. So, yeah, perhaps our government can do more.
Yeah,
we'll leave it at that.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Dylan. This has been a long one, but I think everyone's going to take a lot of information from this. Appreciate you coming on.
Much, Dylan.
We'll put your links and stuff in the comments and stuff, because for everyone, Dylan does do a lot of social media. You can go find some more of them so that you guys know that you can get all his information.
Yeah. Thank you both for having me. It was great.
Thanks so much, Dylan. All right. Well, on behalf of my co-host, Alex Shanks, thanks, Dylan, for being on the show. You're watching the Canadian Mortgage Show. We'll see you next time.
Talk to you later. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to like and subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, make sure to follow us. Please give us a 5-star rating. You can even send us an email, because we want to know what you guys want to hear about. That's what we're here for. Reach out anytime.